Hey folks, Laurie Bellinger here, sharing with you some things that I think are important. Recently, a friend of mine pointed out that, in the spirit of neurodiversity, something I'm a big fan of discussing, that I ought to consider that my written blog might be better received by some of my auditory oriented friends if I were to read it to you. So I created some fun slides so it wouldn't get boring visually either. And that's what I'm going to do. So here we go. Thank you for your patience in sticking with me while I try this new thing. Welcome to my next attempt at blogging, or I guess we'd call this vlogging, about trauma therapy and all the interesting things connected to it. My name is Laurie Bellinger. I'm a clinical social worker and trauma therapist, a trauma educator, an MDRIA-approved EMDR consultant, and TBRI provider, and an official SSP mentor. And I'm a lifelong student of life. I'm trying to start this new adventure in writing and talking about some of the things that I find most foundational in my own practice. The hope is that some of these thoughts will reach my fellow clinicians, many of them ducking burnout in a world that feels increasingly like an unregulated game of vicarious trauma dodgeball. Also, there are those out there who are just genuinely interested in emotional well-being for themselves and others, and you're welcome here too. Friends and family have often asked me across my entire career, how do you do what you do without getting burned out yourself? Well, if I manage to do this blog on a regular basis, you're going to learn all about that. I'm also planning to add 3 practical resources at the end of each one of these articles. So fingers crossed that you'll take time to stick with me. So let's do this. The last few years have been hard. Hard sounds completely ineffective as a description, and yet I really do not have a better word. There's been plenty of bad hard, and there are plenty of other places for you to read and listen about that. Some of the hard was good hard. And I am not negating here all of the bad things that people experienced. I just figure you have plenty to choose from if you'd like to read or listen about that. So here for your discernment is some of what I've found to be good hard over the last few years. This post will focus on the good hard that I've seen in the area of relationship. Because, well, as you're going to hear me say over and over again, relationship is everything. So let's start with one of my favorite places, my therapy office. As a therapist working straight through the pandemic, I was suddenly pushed to adapt to a world of telehealth in order to continue supporting my clients. Most therapists did at least some telehealth during this time, and anyone who truly knows me knows that this was a big ask. I am a deeply sensory-oriented EMDR therapist who works with the entire age range, 4 years old and up. Sitting in a chair and putting a screen between myself and my clients felt a little like someone had chopped both my arms off. Yet, for a period of time, this was a lifeline for many. And today, I still blend in-person and telehealth in my practice to better meet my clients' needs. I adapted. While telehealth will likely never be my preferred method of providing psychotherapy, I will always be grateful for the option. This was good hard. Telehealth, though, was really only the beginning of our 2D professional existence. It also became trainings, conferences, IEP meetings, all done online for a time, a very long time. It was through this experience that I felt such added compassion for the children trying to continue their K-12 education on screens during the pandemic. I mean, seriously, kindergarten this way? As I struggled myself to learn in my own trainings and conferences in that same fashion, This very 2D educational experience helped highlight for me some of the whys behind many student accommodations that I advocate for every day. The pandemic made it very clear, hopefully to everyone, what parents of children with IEPs and 504s have known all along. Not every child can learn in the same way. Different does not mean cannot. And neurodiverse students deserve the same opportunities as every other child for a quality education. Personal disclosure moment here. I am a trauma therapist, but I'm also an adult with ADHD. My own struggles with ADHD are part of the reason I enjoy working for neurodivergent clients of all ages. I know what it's like for everyone else's expectations to have no bearing on my lived experience with my own brain. It can be a very lonely space where you often feel misunderstood and at risk for judgment. And that there is the crux of it. Why I'm writing this, talking about it, why I titled the blog the way that I did. Relationship. It's everything. By that, I do not mean that relationships can fix every problem or heal every wound. What I mean is that our relationships with ourselves and with one another are necessary precursors to dealing with any problem or healing any wound. The pandemic actually threw this idea into sharp contrast. And here are 3 areas that stood out to me. The first one's education. It was only when students had to learn entirely on a screen that many people started to really appreciate the importance of social emotional connection that teachers have with their students, and not just for social emotional development, for the academic learning as well. Even students who do not usually require special accommodations in class had begun struggling. Teachers struggled too, both to connect and engage their students, and also present material in such a limited, opposite of embodied and sensory rich manner. So I was working as a consultant for school districts during this time, and I got to see a couple of administrators really begin to understand the impacts of trauma on education. Suddenly, here was a shared experience that was relatable to everyone. This planted the seed for the beginnings of an increase in compassion for both their educators and for their students around trauma-informed care materials. Now, it didn't always work out that way. Unfortunately, I did get to see some ruptured relationships where things fell apart in a school setting, resulting in dramatic consequences for both adults and students. There still is a very long way to go before trauma-informed care principles permanently change the culture of education. Yet the pandemic, it did provide some good hard that is today inspiring some growth in that direction. Let's hope that we continue to hear the words relationship and felt safety in educational institutions going forward. Let's also hope that in the perceived rush to catch everybody up, we don't inadvertently end up even farther behind by glossing over the deep importance of connectedness and relationship in our school communities. The next area was outpatient mental health. Now, I'm currently in private practice myself, though I continue to support my colleagues through consultation in large outpatient clinics, where I also got my start as a therapist. In therapy sessions, it was only when some of these clinicians lost the ability to see their clients in the sanctuary of their private offices that it started to really click for some of them. What a big part of therapy is often found in the creation of safe space for human connection and relationship. Have you noticed that there's been a big spike in the therapy continuing education community talking about somatic approaches and deeper learning about holding space for others. You see, the art of the therapeutic relationship in therapy was kind of pushed to the back burner of continuing education in some respects during the medicalization of psychotherapy. Mind you, this is my own opinion, having watched the rise of HMOs in insurances and its effect on mental health delivery systems over multiple decades. I may have to write an entire post on that sometime. For many years, therapists have been under enormous pressure to mimic the medical field in an effort to be covered by health insurance policies. And while being covered by insurance has made therapy more widely affordable, a very good thing, it has also had a tendency to pathologize the human experience and reduce quality to those things that are just easy for insurance companies to measure. It treats psychotherapists as not professionals. We are not technicians. One could argue that the medical field has actually also experienced some of the same devaluing of their professional judgment as well, reducing clinical discernment to an insurance-approved fast food menu item of acceptable choices. Again, I could write an entire post on this, so just tell me if you're wanting that. And while there is some overlap with medicine, the field of psychotherapy values skills that are not as easily put into convenient little boxes. The pandemic brought back into sharp relief the importance of these less measurable skills. Holding space, emotional attunement, mirroring, and co-regulation, just to name a few. Perhaps the difficulties we've faced over the last few years seared into us a deeper collective understanding of the importance of healthy therapeutic connection and relationship. I really hope so. After all, if children learn best in school when they feel safe and in good relationship, is it any wonder that it might be similar in mental health treatment? And is skillfully creating a safe and connected therapy relationship with healthy and compassionate boundaries just assumed? Or is it just looked over in continuing education for more impressive sounding accomplishments? You can add therapy modality after therapy modality and its corresponding acronyms to your toolbox. I do too. I use CBT, NP, I love EMDR, I admire SE, and I can talk all day about TBRI. Yet, a very good therapist uses their personhood first. It's all about relationship. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put out there that there's actually been some tendency for therapists to live in specialty silos, pushed in part by the checkbox nature of insurances. Just as human experience has been pathologized and placed into boxy diagnostic codes, so have the therapists who provide the treatments. For example, I am an EMDR therapist. What does that mean? It does not mean that I do EMDR, as if it were a procedure. Non-therapists often do not know the difference. What actually happens is that I utilize EMDR therapy as an entire therapy modality, and I use the AIP model for case conceptualization, and I often blend it with other modalities like ego state therapies, TBRI, influence from somatic psychotherapies. I pull from polyvagal theory and even some updated CBT. Now, 20 plus years ago, when I went through my initial training as a therapist, I was actually told, you are now just insert your modality here, therapist. Eclectic is sloppy. However, with decades of experience under my belt at this point, serving the needs of very complicated presentations and vulnerable populations, I can say that I very strongly disagree. Thoughtful and studious integrative practice is good and needs to be encouraged, not siloed. Sharing ideas across disciplines and modalities is very good and makes us all better clinicians. Returning to the foundations of therapy as being about a safe relationship and a space in which a person might risk, learn, cope, and do some healing. This is a very, very good thing. And so perhaps therapists everywhere will continue to grow in ways that they had not even expected as this integrative trend continues. And this is one of the things I would call good hard. The next area, family spaces. This is an example that pinches the heart to talk about. Our personal lives were all turned upside down during the pandemic. The upheaval had a way of exposing what was healthy and what was not under the surface of relationships. I noticed how it was only when the elderly were isolated forcefully from loved ones by medical rules that society as a whole seemed to appreciate how life-giving in-person connection truly is. Previously, there was just so much complacency about the older generation disappearing from participation in community. Now, I am not here to talk about the shutdowns and separations that occurred during the pandemic to judge any of the decisions that were made at the time, one way or the other. And pretty please, do not turn my lovely little blog into a place to leave angry political comments. You're going to find plenty of that in other spaces if you need a place to vent. Again, here, I just want to share some of the hard that actually helped highlight for me what is good and necessary for humans. There were those during the pandemic that endured a tragic dearth of human connection. There were also others that were confronted with the true state of their personal relationships when they were confined day in and day out together in their homes. Both in my therapy office professionally and in my community as a friend, I have witnessed families fall apart and others become that much stronger. What was protective and buffering during these difficult times? Healthy relationship, first with ourselves and then with others. So if healthy relationship with ourselves and others is so crucial, well, what do we know about it? One of my favorite areas of interest in therapy, and oh my gosh, guys, there are so many areas of special focus. You can literally be a student indefinitely, and it's something I highly recommend. So one of these areas is something called attachment theory. This theory is all about relationship and how it, or the lack of it, shapes us as we grow. When I do trainings with educators in our public schools, there's quite a bit of talk about this thing called self-regulation. This is a term you'll hear in goals people have for children all the time. It may have been used in a therapy office sometimes to talk about adults and children attempting to be more mindful of their own life choices or managing feelings in a healthy way. Guys, it's also a completely unhelpful term much of the time, especially as it relates to children. Someone presenting on emotion regulation, and I dearly wish I could remember who it was so I can give them credit, said something to the effect of, "There is no such thing as self-regulation. There is only internalized co-regulation." I love this. It makes so much sense to my webby brain. Let me try to explain why. When I explain attachment to parents, I often start this way, thanks to TBRI, which, by the way, stands for Trust-Based Relational Intervention. When a baby is born, they cannot regulate themselves at all. The caregiver is their external regulator. All they can do is cry and yell, and it's up to the adult to puzzle it out, to solve the problem, meet the need. The infant isn't thinking, I'm cold, get me a blanket. Not yet. It's just the of discomfort. If the adult responds well, comfort is achieved. Baby learns to trust the regulator to do their job. Felt safety is achieved. This is hugely important for later development. Later, a child becomes able to communicate more than distress. I'm hungry. And the adult is able to provide help. You may have this or that. And so the regulation becomes something of a team effort. This team of problem solving between an adult and a young person so that the child might learn how to both identify and meet appropriately their own felt needs is a huge part of education. Co-regulation. It's actually what I love to talk to educators about, K through 12. So then what is self-regulation, and why are all of the cute Pinterest boards about social emotional learning or SEL all about that, self-regulation? Well, self-regulation is when a person is able to turn in toward themselves and co-regulate from the inside. It's basically internalized co-regulation, like I mentioned earlier. Most elementary school children are not really ready for that. And if you had an amazingly blessed childhood, or your parents were super responsive and available regulators for you, and you happen to have no physical, emotional, or learning challenges, or I don't know, maybe a global pandemic experience, still no. You would still not be ready to self-regulate. Or, as we said, internally co-regulate yourself based on your own history of being beautifully regulated by others, not as an elementary school child. There is a reason that we don't teach abstract math to kindergartners. That would be developmentally inappropriate, right? They don't have the brain structure to support that yet, right? Yeah, okay, that. So, what to do with all this regulation talk? Well, what we are really talking about here are the foundations of relationship. We learn as infants to first connect externally, to feel safe and okay, secure. It's communication and trust. And then we learn about back and forth in relationship. Eventually, we learn how to do that back and forth on the inside. It's our relationship with our own selves, aka your self-esteem, your self-talk, your relationship to all the versions of yourself that you've ever been at every age, which all inform you how to live your life. If there are any therapists out there reading this just now, or listening to this just now, thinking about ego state therapy, you're on the right track. Relationships. Oh, and just because you manage to internally co-regulate as you're out there seriously adulting, don't think that the other two forms of regulation disappeared. This is not a trickster for kids kind of moment. Adults co-regulate with each other all the time. If you've ever leaned into a good friend or spouse at the end of a tough day and allowed them to care for you, you've been co-regulated. Co-regulating is an important part of adult relationships too. Chances are pretty good that you have been, are, or will be co-regulating others, and sometimes even regulating others, mostly children, and in emergency situations with adults. You'll be doing this your entire life. Understanding all of this is a key to a good and happy life. Or as I titled this long ramble in the first place, relationships are everything. So, now that I've laid out why I think relationships are everything, and some of the good emphasis we've gained during the pandemic, the good heart, on just how important relationship is for us. In my rambling ADHD way, you're welcome. Now what? Well, one would hope that you'd be wondering how you might personally go about learning to become a healthier internal and external emotional regulator, whether you happen to be a professional therapist or not. Perhaps you are wondering if your own attachment style is as healthy as it truly could be. Dr. Karen Purvis, PhD, one of the developers of TBRI, trust-based relational interventions, once said something approximating, "You cannot bring someone to a place that you are not." It's not an exact quote, I'm certain, but credit for where I first heard this. And you'll hear me say it often if we spend enough time together. Professionally, I really don't care how many books you've published, where you've presented, or how long your waiting list for clients might be. The bedrock of a good therapist is the ability to share your own neuroception of safety, first and foremost. After this, sure, bring on the advanced trainings and the case conceptualizations. To be a safe and trusted co-regulator through and through means that you have done, and continue to do, enough of your own work, cared for your own self. Have you? Do you continue to do this hard work? Because, it never really ends, even for professionals. If you're one of the non-therapists who's been listening to this, and you've made it all the way to the end, because we're just about there now, first of all, thank you. Second, aren't we all trying to be just a little bit healthier than the generation before us? To give our own children and the next generation of community a leg up in this world. I know I am. And you don't have to be critical of your own family or identify as having a significant trauma history in order to want to continue to grow in health and well-being. So I applaud your tenacity in listening to, oh my gosh, over 26 minutes of my admittedly ADHD-influenced ramble about the importance of all relationship. So for those who are looking for those resources I mentioned in the beginning, this is where we are. I promised you 3. I talked a great deal about the importance of relationship, so here are some links to information that I've found helpful over the years. First, whether you're listening to this as a curious clinician or just as a curious human, there is a 3-minute and 16-second introduction to TBRI, trust-based relational intervention. What it is an attachment-based, trauma-informed intervention that's designed to meet the complex needs of vulnerable children. TBRI uses empowering principles to address physical needs, connecting principles for attachment needs, and correcting principles to disarm fear-based behavior. And while this intervention is actually based on years of attachment, sensory processing, and neuroscience research, the heartbeat of TBRI is connection. If you want to do a deeper dive into all things TBRI, there's also a YouTube video linked here. I highly recommend this for clinicians and curious growing humans alike. I also list their webpage. Second, if you found the discussion, let me go back a little bit here. Next one, okay, Jacob. If you found the discussion about relationship and its importance for the education of children in school settings interesting, here's a link to a video done by Jacob Ham. Dr. Ham is a clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, researcher in psychotherapy and epigenetics, and he's a trainer in traumatic stress. He's also an assistant professor in psychiatry and the director of the Center for Child Trauma and Resilience at the, I'm going to mispronounce this, ICTHM, School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. And he works out of Mount Sinai, Beth Israel. I love his illustrations and how he breaks down the science in a really friendly way. And I've shared this one with many educators and gotten great feedback about it. Okay, next, if you're interested in exploring your own attachment style, either as a professional therapist yourself or just as a generally curious and ever-growing human, here's a link to an explanation of the adult attachment interview. I've experienced the AAI myself personally. It was very enlightening and I believe helpful in my continued growth as a therapist and as a healthy enough human in the process. I also found a free webinar for therapists to check out that was produced by TTAC on an introduction to attachment concepts and research. And this was also very interesting to me. So, thank you. Thank you for spending your valuable time listening to my blog. Please feel free to comment on what you found interesting and what you might like me to expand on in the future. Please be kind in the comments. I'm still a newbie to this kind of thing, both blogging and doing videos. And there's also a little information here about a training that I'll be doing in September of 2023 on exactly this topic, emotional safety. Thanks again so much for your time. Take care and have a great day.